Hello and welcome to the Small Business Association of Michigan Small Business Briefing, the Monday edition. I am Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
And hello, everyone. Alexa Kramer. I'm the Director of Government Operations at the Small Business Association of Michigan. I am doing my very best Sarah Miller impersonation today. Before we kick off, of course, I want to thank our sponsor. The Small Business Briefing is sponsored by Marana Group, a data, document, and distribution solutions company. So thank you, Marana Group, for your continued sponsorship of the Small Business Briefing. And before we get into it, where in the world is Brian Calley?
Yeah, I find myself in Traverse City today, beautiful Traverse City, on location, if you will, actually in a pretty special place. So as you see behind me here, the logo lounge. So that means I'm at Elfie Logo Gear. So Bonnie Alfonso's business in Traverse City, which has been a long-term member of SBAM. In fact, Bonnie served on our board of directors as the chair of our board of directors in the past and continues to be, I dare say, our most faithful watcher of the briefing. So she's hosting an SBAM event for some of our local members in Traverse City tonight. And she was nice enough to make her space available. And since we were coming up anyway, we decided to go ahead and do the briefing on location. So Bonnie, thank you for your hospitality today. It's really exciting, by the way, too. I invited her on. She said no, she didn't need to come on the show to say hello, but this place is different since I've been here. Expanded in their production capacity, the size of the business itself, like the physical footprint of the business, and just a lot of energy, a lot of action, a lot of activity. And I'm not surprised, because that's what you get with small business owners that are doing high quality work. It's just really cool. Actually, kind of going through and seeing the things in production. A lot of companies that I know that happen to have logo gear running through the place right now. In fact, in case I get thirsty while I'm doing this, is full of water. And as you can see, Bonnie said this will be my new favorite thermos, and I think that she is right. So Bonnie, thanks for your hospitality today.
Yes, thank you, Bonnie. We certainly appreciate it. So getting into some exciting topics today, first and foremost, convention. So last week on the 19th, we approached our filing deadline. So the arena is set for our candidates. Us at SBAM have been poring over what those candidates look like and getting into sort of endorsement mode. We had a few folks drop off, but I think we're sitting at about 170 plus candidates between the House and Senate that have filed for the August primary. So outside of that, we also had some action this weekend too with the Michigan Republican Convention. So Brian, can you give us a little bit of a overview of what happened at the convention?
Yeah, thank you. Well, there's the legislative race is really something else that I think it's 570 or so candidates. It seems like a modern time high, certainly as long as I've been involved in politics. I've never seen this many candidates file for election. We saw also 10 candidates on the Republican side line up to run for governor, and of course on the Democratic side, an incumbent running, so no opposition in the primary there. But there are certain positions that are nominated by political parties, not through the regular primary voting process. So the Democrats a few weeks ago held their nominating convention. We covered that on this briefing. The Republicans did over the weekend, and there are several positions that are selected at that time, but really the main contested, the big one, the headliners, were the Attorney General position and the Secretary of State position. So Matt DePerno has been nominated by the Republicans to run for Attorney General. That will be against Dana Nessel, and then Karamo is the Secretary of State. Christine Karamo is the Secretary of State running for the Secretary of State position against Jocelyn Benson. Now, technically, these were endorsement conventions, and they get ratified per the rules in separate conventions that will happen in August. But both political parties saw value or benefit in identifying their candidates earlier in the process, narrowing it down to who their preferred candidates were, and then doing and then they'll go through the kind of the formality, if you will, of nominating these individuals, these candidates later on in the summer. So the field is basically set for those positions at this point. Now, for SBAM's part, in the past, SBAM has from time to time endorsed in the Attorney General position. So just as an example, Tom Leonard was endorsed in 2018 for Attorney General when he was running against now incumbent Dana Nessel. We have not taken a position traditionally in the Secretary of State position. So we have a separate PAC board of directors, which is populated by small business owners. And they'll be reviewing all of these races, the legislative races, the governor's race, the attorney general's race, the Secretary of State race, the Supreme Court races, all of that over the course of the coming months. But at least for a few positions, a few of these statewide positions, the field is now set.
Great, thank you, Brian. Next up on the list to cover is the Unemployment Insurance Agency. And before we get into a little bit of stats, I do want to plug, we do have a call to action out. So I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Oh, you just want to unmute there.
Whoops, sorry about that. So our call to action is live. It is thanking our legislators on passing a bill that appropriates $135 million to the Unemployment Trust Fund, which is funded by you employers, and then also helps cut down on some fraud that we know is prevalent within the system. So I'm putting that in the chat right now. And then kind of back to the Unemployment Insurance Agency unemployment system. It's been a while since we've touched base on this. So Brian, what are the latest statistics?
Yeah, in the unemployment system, we've talked a lot about this over the course of the last couple of years, and it's been a hugely problematic area, both competing for employees with the unemployment system during the height, or maybe I'd say the depths of the pandemic, but then also the problems with the fraud payments that were made out of it that totaled billions of dollars. A total of, according to one audit, about $8.5 billion that was paid out inappropriately. Now, most of that money in normal times is funded by employers. So you pay assessments, goes into the trust fund. If you have layoffs, it covers the cost of those layoffs. And what we have been asking for over the last few years, since it came to light that so many payments were made out of this trust fund that shouldn't have been, that employers should not be billed back for those expenses. So there's been a series of deposits, and we're not done yet, but the most recent one that Alexa just mentioned has been made. And we decided that, whenever we activate our grassroots network, we've said to people, hey, this thing is going through and we either want it to pass or we want to stop it. Could you contact your legislator? And in this case, they actually did what we asked. We wanted to deposit into trust fund. We wanted more guardrails put on to prevent fraud, and it passed. So it passed through the legislature. The House and the Senate had good bipartisan support. The governor signed it, and so this is a new approach, maybe a kinder, gentler approach that we'd like to activate our grassroots network to positively reinforce that those kinds of actions. So this is a call to action where when you engage in it, you'll be saying thank you to your senator, thank you to your representative, thank you to the governor for passing this bill and making this deposit so that employers are not charged back for the problems in the system. So please do participate if you haven't already. The link is in the chat. Now, checking in on the unemployment system, obviously the overall utilization of the employment system is way, way down compared to what it was when there were mandatory shutdowns in the system. And so what we are looking at today is like, who's left in the system? What are the industries that are most represented in the unemployment system? Because, as employers struggle to find people, like, why would there be any layoffs when there's this many shortages? And, it's interesting, the industry sector. So those that are continuing claims. So and this would be the bulk of them that are already on the system, and there's just another week on the system because you have to go through each essentially to recertify each week. Now, so for the certifications this week, construction was number one. at 11,321 claimants, and then manufacturing number two, 6,280. Now, and then administration and support below that, so administrative positions, then healthcare, then retail, then wholesale. So that's the list. But the top two, which are by far the lion's share of it, being construction and manufacturing. Now there's shortages in construction and manufacturing. So why would there be layoffs? And I suspect that it's because of supply chain disruptions. So yeah, there's orders, yeah, there's work to be done, but there's something missing in the process. And so that everybody's just stuck until they can move on further. So those were the continuing claims, and the ones that were new this time, the new jobless claims. Wholesale trade was about 3,000, manufacturing 1,250. Those being far and away bigger new claim areas than the other ones. And so I think this is a good example of the type of where you see everything is connected together. So it's one thing, there's demand for products and services. There's huge demand for people right now, and there's an appetite for people to spend, but the demand is outpacing what the supply can accommodate today, and those shortages are putting a stop to some production. So that's an update on the unemployment system as it stands today. It will take years to build the unemployment system back up to what it was back in 2019. It was one of the strongest in the entire country in terms of its solvency. It actually never went negative during the pandemic. It got awfully close. Had there been one more round of closures or limitations on business, it probably would have gone negative. But nevertheless, that cushion, if you will, or the what you need in there to handle the ups and downs over the long term, it'll take a while to build that back up.
Really interesting statistics there, Brian. And I was just at St. John's Chamber talking about how everything kind of plays within the supply chain disruptions, workforce shortages, and then inflation as well. It's just very interesting. Next up, there are some big shakeups within commercial real estate, particularly over where I live in Southeast Michigan. So Brian, can you tell us a little bit about what those shakeups look like? And then also, of course, what does this mean for some of our smaller spots and smaller employers?
It's another example of where everything is connected. So you see something happening over in one part of our economy, and it might not be obvious how that connects into to small businesses when it's the big players making moves. But in commercial real estate, I think is a pretty good example where in the Renaissance Center, Deloitte, big audit and accounting firm that used to have about 100,000 square feet there, 6 floors, has moved out, and they moved into another location for a lot less space. And then so left in the Renaissance Center, the two biggest. So Deloitte was the third largest tenant. Of course, General Motors is the largest. Second largest is Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they're still very substantial tenants of the building. But the General Motors has adopted a work anytime, anywhere type of an approach, and so I think that the future of buildings like that is really in question. Also, we saw that in Troy, the Bank of America is leaving its regional headquarters, 145,000 square feet, and not clear exactly where they're going or how they're going to relocate, but a couple of big moves. All right, what does this mean for small business? We had started hearing a little while ago, anecdotally, that spaces that a small business needs, like for example, at the Small Business Association of Michigan, where we have about 8,000 square feet for our team of just under 30 employees, the spaces like that are in higher demand today because big people that used to, or big businesses that used to use really big spaces, are now downsizing. There's more competition for those medium or middle-sized spaces. And so while I do expect that the large space market is going to be soft and probably get good rates there, it's because not very many people need that much space these days. But it's going to put more pressure with deeper pockets and bigger players in spaces that small businesses in the past dominated in terms of the mix of tenants in these buildings. So it's a complicated world out there, and so some of the dominoes are starting to fall in the commercial real estate area and market. You know, so it's a difficult decision to make. I know we've actually been thinking about that as well at our association, where some of our employees are working remotely, some of them are in person. We could probably get by with less space, and so, but how much less, and what about when we have the whole team in? All those sorts of things. You know, the big companies are thinking of all that too, and now that we're a couple years out from everybody figuring out how to work remotely, if it's possible for you, if you have the type of business that can work remotely, figuring out how to do it and how to do it well. I think those dominoes are starting to fall when it comes to lease renewals coming up and decisions being made to vacate spaces. So I'm a little bit worried about the downtown Detroit area. Certainly when we see what's happened in downtown Lansing. So Lansing, where the SBAM headquarters is, the state is the biggest tenant in town, or maybe I should say was the biggest tenant in town. So much of the state space has been vacated that if you look at the main downtown business quarter, which used to be full of small businesses that served office workers, there's so many empty spaces, so many empty spots in those buildings. And so when I see what happens there, and I see some of these things start to happen in Detroit, I think it's pretty clear that our inner cities, our urban areas, our downtown areas especially, I think they're in for some tough transitional times here, going from how things used to be to how they're going to be here in the future.
Yeah, it's one of those issues that at first blush you don't necessarily connect it back to small businesses, but I think that you're certainly right, Brian, and I think that your comment, it's a complicated world out there, might be the understatement of the day, week, year, fill in the blank. Last and certainly not least, did want to touch on some latest COVID numbers. So Brian, what are those looking like?
Yeah, what I'm going to do today, I just happened to get my hands on some slides that look a little bit different than what we normally look at, but they'll maybe look familiar. These are the business leaders for Michigan slides that I used to use. They used to make them weekly, so I used them quite a bit in the past. But if you take a look at, this is the US as compared to the European Union, and actually quite encouraging here. So you see a little bit of an uptick in the US as a whole, not much. Certainly in the Northeast, as we talked about last week, is where we see the rising cases for in terms of the things that are starting to kind of push the national numbers up a little bit. But in the European Union, we see a decline still happening. So they had their Delta and Omicron, which is this earlier stage here, and then Omicron 2, that BA2 variant. The numbers went back up, but then now have fallen pretty substantially, about 35% in the last week. So it was a very short-lived, the Omicron 2 wave, if you will, was very short-lived in Europe, and now coming back down. So even if we have that here, and it does look in some areas of our country, maybe we will, but again, the EU experience is encouraging. It was very short and nowhere near as high. Also looking at the European Union's deaths per million. So this is kind of equalizing at, the populations and saying, how many deaths per million. You can see this Omicron 2, we had Delta, Omicron, and then Omicron 2 BA2 variant. And you'll see that deaths didn't go up. It made them level out for a while, coming down from the original Omicron variant, and then started to go down again with the overall numbers. Again, encouraging news. Even if we experience a wave here, looking at what's happened in another part of the West, good reason to expect that it might have some impact, but not the type of impact that the previous waves have had. In terms of where things stand today, Michigan is ranked 20th overall in cases per million. You can see on the map here very clearly that New York and and other parts of the Northeast are the main areas where you see numbers rising some. But even in those areas, you're not seeing a lot of the complicated aspects of previous waves. So again, reason to be optimistic that that any potential wave that we're facing right now with the BA.2 variant of Omicron um, will be a lot more moderate. I will point out while we have this up, we didn't talk about in our comments earlier today or in our discussion the decision by the Biden administration to appeal the court decision, the Florida federal court decision to repeal the mask mandate on planes and other types of public transit. Now, the Biden administration feels that they have to preserve the authority of the CDC. They can't let that decision stand because it says that they didn't have the statutory authority. The decision also said something else that I think this map makes pretty clear, and that is that the decision by the CDC to extend the mask mandate for public transit, but not really anywhere else, say for healthcare, that it's arbitrary. And so what they said was anywhere that's green or yellow in the past, anywhere that's green or yellow, low or medium spread, that masks were no longer required. And yet for planes across the board, no matter where they're coming from or where they're going, all were required to wear masks. So what the judge said was arbitrary and capricious. And when you look at a map like this, you can see why the federal government was very vulnerable to that type of a decision because it doesn't fit all the other things that the CDC is doing. The cases here in Michigan have started to rise some. You'll see about a 35% increase, but it's, those percentages are big when you're starting at a very low base. So we are at a very low base. You can see that it went from about 1,100 cases per day to almost 1,500 cases per day in the past week. Keep in mind that the state is only reporting once a week now, so we don't have as many regular updates, but still relatively low numbers here. I think we can feel pretty confident about where there's not anything right around the corner that's going to cause us any big problems. The positivity rate, we haven't talked about this on here for a long time, but it stands at 7.2%, which is kind of high. Usually after it gets past 5, you see it rise up quite a bit. The reason that we haven't really covered or talked about this in a while is because so many tests now happen just with the at-home tests, and people don't necessarily go in. You can report your at-home tests if you wanted to. If you had the ambition to, you could call up the public health department, let them know, and they'll put you in the numbers. But obviously, nobody does that, or very few people do that. So the percent positive, I think, might be a little skewed. And then looking at hospitalizations, you see that just an ever so slight increase, but this type of a volume is something that hospitals will really not have any problem keeping up with. If you look back, this point when it was about 2000, I remember when we had this like really slow, steady increase through the summer. When it was around 2000, the hospitals really weren't complaining that it was getting difficult for them. Certainly when it got past 3,500 and 4,000 is when things got really serious at hospitals. And of course, almost hit 5,000 on 2 different peaks. But now being only about 10% of that high, they're in pretty good shape. So all in all, between what we see happening here in Michigan, what we see happening across the country, even with the Northeast experiencing some increasing numbers, when I look at the experience that just happened in the EU, how short-lived and moderate that impact was compared to other waves, gives me confidence that the worst is behind us. Now, again, I'm no epidemiologist; I just play one on the briefing. But when you look at what's happened in Europe, it's been a pretty decent precursor over the last couple of years. We can see what's happening there, especially in the UK, but really across Europe. Usually, what happens there is just a little bit ahead of what happens here. as I had mentioned before, I think we're a little bit better protected now in the U.S. because we had a more recent, the Omicron wave was really, really big here. And so the population-based immunity between vaccines and recent infections is, I think, at least for a period of time, puts us in a fairly decent position to not have as many serious illnesses from future infections as we have in the past.
Great. Well, Brian, we have a few minutes, so if you don't mind, we did get a question in from Facebook that I want to kick to you, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. But we had someone from our Facebook Live say to thank us for our UIA update. But their question was, do you have any advice for employees who have yet to see a resolution on their UIA overpayments?
Yeah, great question. So I know that the system, the whole political system, the administrative department that handles unemployment, they're all struggling with how to deal with this, because people that may have been overpaid because the system didn't handle it right, not because of anything nefarious, not because anybody did anything wrong in terms of making a claim, but the system just either paid out more or qualified somebody that should have been disqualified. What do you do with those? I would suggest that you make contact with your state representative or your state senator. Now, there's they have, I don't know what to call it, like a back door to the system, not to change how things turn out, but they have a way of kind of checking in on a case. And the folks in the department, I think, are very attentive to when a state representative or a state senator makes an inquiry on a case. So if you were to find out who your state rep is and lay out the case to that person or their staff and say, here's a case that's not resolved yet. It's been out there for a long time. Could you please make an inquiry and help me get this resolved? That can maybe help move it along if it hasn't gone through the system. I think they are inclined to try to let as much of it go as they can. It's just a matter of what, and normally if they pay something out that they weren't supposed to, they're supposed to try to get it back. In this case, the mistakes and the problems in the system were so widespread across so many different people. I think there's a reluctance to just say, all right, we paid it out and shouldn't have time to pay it back. So start with your state rep or state senator. And then if you don't get anywhere from there, I think it's always fair to reach out to the governor's office as well. Although I think that there is a system specifically developed for legislative offices, which I've heard that there's been some success in getting things resolved in that way.
Yep, I've heard that too. And for those that are listening in, I did drop into the chat how to find your state representative and state senator. Like Brian said, they do have an easy pathway to get these kind of cases resolved. So great question and great advice, Brian. That brings us to the end of today's briefing. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you on Thursday.
All right, thanks everybody. See you on Thursday.